Hey everyone. Today's video, I wanted to discuss the topic of the term gender and basically explain why this is a term that we should maybe think about avoiding for the most part, because it's just become so convoluted and so contorted and so watered down, and it means so many different things to different groups of people that it is just creating a lot of issues in regards to trying to have discussions with people across different ideologies. So this is a video that I'm basically going to be explaining what the different things that the term gender can be referring to, and what terms we should use instead to refer to those things. This video is meant to explain this to all types of people from all different types of ideologies. It's really for everyone, so conservatives, liberals, feminists, anti-feminists, whatever, social justice warriors, anti-social justice warriors, doesn't really matter. Anybody, I would encourage to consider what I'm saying here in regards to avoiding the term gender and using instead these terms, these three terms, just so that we can all at least know what the fuck we're talking about and understand each other. Even if we still disagree, we can at least be speaking the same language. Okay. Now, as a side, I want to say that I understand that for radical feminists in particular, the term gender is very important to radical feminist analysis. So, I understand that within the radical feminist realm that I don't think that we should stop using the term gender, because, we're all on the same page. We all understand what gender means, so that confusion isn't an issue. So what I'm talking about is when we are dialoguing across ideologies, across political groups and whatnot, that it at least can start to have more clarity in those discussions if we use these three terms. Okay, so gender, what does it mean? There's three different things that gender can mean depending on who's talking and who's listening. It can either mean biological sex, it can either mean sex roles and sex stereotypes, or, and here's the interesting one, it can mean feelings about sex stereotypes and sex roles. So the first category, biological sex, is the fact females and males, which is what the propagation of the human species is based in biological sex reality. And just because a small percentage of people have genetic or hormonal abnormalities doesn't negate the fact that males and females are designed specifically to propagate the species. So this includes chromosomes and all the genital forms that come with that. So on the female side, vulva, uterus, ovaries. It also includes menstruation and pregnancy, which only females menstruate and only females can get pregnant. No males menstruate, no males get pregnant. So yeah, on the male side, you have penis, prostate, testicles, all that shit. And then, of course, there's secondary sex characteristics that, can come along with these. Biological sex is reality. It is a reality. There are material consequences that are inextricably tied to biological sex. So the next category, sex roles and sex stereotypes. So what this category is, ultimately, is ideas about reality. So biological sex is reality. Sex roles and sex stereotypes are basically just ideas that we have about biological sex, the reality of biological sex. So these are things that we basically have made up and can vary a lot from culture to culture. But they're all things that they're not inherent. These ideas that men are supposed to be a certain way, women are supposed to be a certain way, or that because of the biological reality of a particular sex, that means that they have to be relegated to certain jobs or tasks or roles or whatever, right? So these ideas are things that attach meaning to the biological sex. So biological sex doesn't necessarily inherently mean anything, just like the color of someone's skin doesn't inherently mean anything. It's just Some people have white skin because their ancestors lived in cloudy climates. Some people have dark skin because their ancestors lived in very hot, sunny climates. You know, there's reasons for it that we can come to understand how it came to be. And there are some material consequences, like if you have white skin, you will get sunburned if you spend too much time with the sun. But the meaning behind skin color that's what racism is, right? So we say, oh, people with this color skin are superior or more intelligent or whatever, more godly, whatever it is. And people with this color skin are inferior, less intelligent, more whatever, associated with animals, or it's some sort of inferiority, right? Like that is all meanings that are not inherently a part of those biological realities that are attached to it. So in the same way, when we talk about sex roles, sex stereotypes, how men and women are expected to look, how men and women are expected to behave, what roles males and females are expected to fill throughout their lives. These are all things that are constructed. They're ideas that have been made up about biological sex, but are not inherently a part of biological sex. One of those ideas being heteronormativity, that females are supposed to have sex with males and males are supposed to have sex with females. That is one way to have sex, but not everybody does it that way, and that's a part of a construct attached to biological sex, not actually a requirement of being a particular biological sex. But the construct requires that we have sex with the opposite biological sex from us. So the third category, which is the interesting, I would say the most interesting, but the most convoluted and kind of has potentials to be ridiculous. But it also has the potential to really challenge and transform the entire system of ideas that we do have about sex, feelings about sex stereotypes and sex roles. So this category is feelings about ideas about reality, right? So again, we have reality, we have ideas about reality, and now we have feelings about ideas about reality. So the feelings category, and quite often when people talk about gender identity or trans politics, trans activists and their ideology, the entire ideology of gender identity is based in this area of what is actually just feelings about sex stereotypes and sex roles. So the reason that people unfortunately falsely conclude that when they have these feelings, they're confused or conflicted about sex roles and sex stereotypes. Often what we find with these individuals that when they talk about their gender identities, what they end up describing is that they're very confused or conflicted about sex roles and sex stereotypes. But because so often people don't differentiate between these first two categories, they falsely conclude that they are the opposite biological sex because what they actually object to are the ideas about biological sex, not biological sex itself. That's just reality. But when people have been conditioned in our culture to not distinguish between these first two categories, that's how they can falsely conclude that they're the wrong biological sex. So when you actually talk to people that talk about gender identity and they talk about that they aren't the biological sex that they were assigned or whatever, like they're not the same biological sex that their body says they are, or that they're the opposite sex or whatever it is, when you really ask these people to describe how did they know, or to describe the feelings that they have that let them know that they knew they were trans or they knew they were queer or they knew whatever, what they end up describing are basically their feelings about sex roles and sex stereotypes. So some of those feelings could be that they're same-sex attracted. They're females attracted to females, or they're males attracted to males. They're homosexual, or they're just not hetero, even if they're like bisexual or something. But they have same-sex attractions. So being homosexual naturally puts someone in a position of being in conflict with this structure of ideas that we have called sex roles and sex stereotypes. So some of the feelings that people have that when we talk about gender identity is they're same-sex attracted, they don't fit in with the expected stereotypes, they don't like the sex roles they're expected to fill, they do like the features of the stereotypes that the other sex gets to perform, or they don't like the stereotypes that they're expected to perform. They can also have a fetish for the stereotypes that the other sex is expected to perform. Or, and this is a big one, especially for female people, they have been traumatized by the sex roles that they are expected to fill. So an example of that would be female people are expected to fill the role of being a sexual subordinate to males. And unfortunately, for a lot of female people, they experience at a very young age at the hands of neighbors or even their own family members being violated by males because that is the, quote, role, unquote, that they are expected to fill as females, is a role of sexual subordinate. That is actually what is in the mind of the men who violate these girls and women, is that they understand the roles that females are expected to play as sex objects to be violated. So again, reality, ideas about reality, feelings about ideas about reality. So I would encourage you guys to use these terms: biological sex, sex role stereotypes, and feelings about sex role stereotypes, because that's actually what we're talking about. And that gets to be a lot clearer. When people just say gender, they can be referring to any one of these things. Multiple, they can be referring to multiple things even. You know, many of the gender identity rhetoric, when you ask them to explain gender, what you end up with is someone who has all three of these categories very muddled up in their own mind, and they're not making those separations. They're not understanding that there's layers to this, right? And for people who have not been able to make clear distinctions between biological sex and sex roles and stereotypes, the first two categories, when you find yourself in conflict with these ideas, but you're not able to distinguish them from the reality that the ideas are built on, then you end up challenging reality rather than challenging the ideas about reality. And that's how you get gender identity politics, where people are claiming that they're the opposite biological sex, or that they can change their biological sex, or that they're neither biological sex when clearly they are. And I'm not even talking about intersex people, I'm talking about feelings that people have. So really, what gender identity politics does is it doesn't challenge the structure of ideas about biological sex, this is really where the problem is. The problem is really all of these made-up ideas that we have that tells males they have to behave and present themselves a certain way, tells females they have to behave and present themselves a certain way, tells males they have to fill a certain role, tells females they have to compromise significant degrees of their humanity in order to appease their male counterparts. That's a part of the ideas about biological sex that are not inherently a part of actual biological sex reality. So this is why gender politics is actually very regressive, that it completely circumvents where the actual problem lies, is in the structure of ideas, and it jumps over to reality. And so if you have an individual female, say for example, who doesn't like being sexually subordinated or sexually objectified, she might conclude, well, I'm male. And that, like, in her mind, gets her off the hook. And in her mind, she thinks that she's escaping the reality of this structure of ideas that is very harmful to female people. And she might, in some ways, escape it, but she can't really completely escape it. But she misses the bigger picture in that femininity, the sex roles and sex stereotypes that are expected of females to perform and fulfill, they're completely made up system of ideas that are harmful to all females. Any females who enjoy being sexually subordinated are ones that have been traumatized into a state of masochism, and that's not natural. That's traumatization. That is a mentality that has been forced upon women. So anyway, yes, to everyone watching this video, again, please try to keep these 3 categories in mind and ask yourself, what am I actually referring to when I want to say the word gender? And when you hear someone else say the word gender, ask them specifically what they mean so that you can discern what they're talking about, and maybe encourage them to just say biological sex or sex roles and stereotypes, or having feelings about sex roles or stereotypes, having objections or conflicted feelings about those stereotypes and roles that we're expected to play. Because that's really how it works. So, again, remember, reality, ideas about reality, and feelings about ideas about reality.